Believe, and you will see the glory of God. Thank you for tuning into the program. It's the fifth Sunday of Lent. I want to proclaim to you from John chapter 11. When Jesus arrived at Bethany, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him while Mary sat at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would never have died. But even now, I am sure that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said, "Your brother will rise again," Jesus assured her. "I know he will rise again," Martha replied, "in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus told her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though they should die, will come to life. And whoever is alive and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I have come to believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who is to come into the world." We are now in the 5th week of Lent, and I proclaim to you some of the ultimate things. We're talking about death and resurrection, because Passion Sunday will be next week, and then, of course, Easter right after that. The church is preparing us for this and having us think about life and death and what is to come. But also, the church wants us to think about faith. Many people are joining the church at the Easter Vigil. That's the OCIA program, the Order of Christian Initiation of Adults. And we journey with them to the baptismal font, to the ultimate, toward death and resurrection. And we have this story about Lazarus to prepare us for Passion Week, prepare us for Easter. I remember I had the privilege of studying in the Holy Land. The place that we studied was right outside Jerusalem. It was a little town called Bethany on the Mount of Olives. And that's where this story took place. In fact, from our retreat center where I was studying, I could look outside my window and I could see the tomb of Lazarus. Pilgrims from all over the world would come to go down into the tomb of Lazarus. And right above the tomb of Lazarus was the church of Lazarus. And as you go into the church, I'll never forget it, there in gold glittering mosaics right above the altar, right in the sanctuary, are those words of Jesus that said, "I am the resurrection and the life." As we heard in the story, Jesus did raise Lazarus from the dead. He also raised other people from the dead in his ministry, such as a little girl, and he raised a widow's son. Jesus has power over life and certainly over death. The first reading, 5th Sunday of Lent, we heard from Ezekiel, the prophet, and God makes a promise about death and resurrection. God says, and this is one of the most beautiful promises, if not the most beautiful promise in the Bible, "O my people, I will open your graves and have you rise from them." Wow! That's the prophet Ezekiel. God is a promise keeper, and he says, "I have promised and I will do it." Death is not the end. There is something more coming. This is what we hear in the 5th Sunday of Lent all around the world, that death does not have the final say. Dare to believe that death is not the end. These readings are meant to evoke faith. Remember, faith comes by hearing. When we hear the words, it's like a seed that gets in us and sprouts and grows, and that's how faith comes. People are joining the church, soon to be baptized. They're growing in their faith. We journey with these people during the season of Lent. Whether you're Catholic or not, we hear the truths of our faith about resurrection, about life after death, and it evokes faith. Death is not the end, but it's a new beginning. Jesus is Lord over death. Faith is crucial in Christianity. We're not perfect, but if we believe, that's what God wants. God works through faith. Remember Jesus, when he traveled in his ministry, he would do miracles and perform amazing signs. He came to his own hometown of Nazareth, and unfortunately, they didn't really believe in him, and he couldn't do many miracles there because he works through faith. And we are saved by grace through faith. Faith, if you will, is like an electrical cord, a conduit that takes the electricity of grace and brings it to us. And faith begins as an inner assent. Nobody can make you believe. You have to want to believe. And it's a decision. You believe that God is, that God will be good to you, that God loves you, and that God is in your life. And I especially want to say that to people whose faith may be weak. You may be going through some trials and some tribulations, some hardships in your life right now, and you might be thinking, why did God do this to me? Why am I going through this? And maybe you're teetering and being shaken in your faith. It's an inner decision. It comes by the grace of God. God will help you. Pray for faith. Pray to believe. God will strengthen it. There was a time in my life when I wasn't sure if God existed or not. I didn't know if God was real. I read the Bible, but I'm not sure if that really was true. But then I received strength from God to believe. You have to pray for that. Pray for the grace to believe. And God will give you that. By faith, you begin to see. Remember what Jesus said to Martha. If you believe, you will see the glory of God. That's a theme in John, that you come to sight, enlightenment, illumination by believing. You pray for faith, and God gives you the grace to believe. And then things start happening. You start seeing, you have manifestations of grace, and your faith grows. Faith comes by hearing, comes by grace, and then it grows. That's why we're having this reading during the 5th week of Lent, so that our faith will continue to grow, and we will grow also. Faith is so important. We're saved by faith. We believe and we see the glory of God. Faith comes by hearing. And I believe that as you hear this program and as you watch this episode, your faith will grow. We're familiar with death. It's in the news. It's in the news all the time because so much is happening right now. Mass shootings in schools, in malls, in churches, many people being killed. And then the war in the Ukraine, thousands upon thousands of people being killed. The pandemic, we have lost over 1 million people in the United States alone because of the pandemic. And then in the world, over 6 million people have died because of the pandemic. We're very familiar with death. It's in the news all the time. And we're thinking, people are thinking, what will it be like? I know that I'm going to die. What's this going to be like? The Bible provides answers. First of all, the Bible uses soft tones when it comes to death. For example, Paul talked about his own death, and he said, my departure is at hand. You know what a departure is? If you're a traveler, you go to the airport, and you go into the departure lounge, and departure, it's when the plane leaves and goes to another destination. That's a soft tone for death. And then Jesus talked about Lazarus. He talked about Lazarus has fallen asleep, but we're going to go and raise him up. Death is seen in the Bible as a sleep. And you know what happens with sleep? Sleep is followed by an awakening. There's something more that happens after the sleep. It's not just the cessation of life. It's not the end. But death is also spoken of in harsher terms, not just as a departure or sleep. It's spoken of in the scriptures as the enemy. That comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 26. The final enemy that will be placed under Christ's feet will be death. And Paul actually gets very audacious and very daring, and he shouts at death. He says, "Death, where's your victory? Death, where's your sting? Thanks be to God, we have the victory through Jesus Christ." Sometimes you got to get audacious when it comes to death. You got to get daring, and you got to believe. And Paul even taunted death when he said those things. And then he writes about death, Paul does, and he says something very beautiful that I want on my tombstone. He said, "I'm convinced that not even death can separate us from the love of God." That is so good. He goes through this whole litany of things, persecutions and tribulations and sufferings. Can they separate us from the love of God? He said, "I'm convinced that not even death can separate us from the love of God." In fact, just to let you know, I've had 2 near-death experiences when I was 19 years old, changed my life, revolutionized my life. And death doesn't separate us from the love of God. Death actually brings us into communion with the love of God. When I went through that tunnel and I came before God, I was immersed in this intense, powerful love of God. And it was the death experience that brought me to that. Death isn't the end, it's a new beginning. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. If you've lost someone, and we all do, it thrusts us into the grieving process. That happened to me some years ago when I lost my mom and my dad. First of all, my dad. It was so hard, it shook my world. I burst into tears. I remember when my dad passed away, he fell asleep, and in his sleep, he passed away. The paramedics came and brought him. They worked on him. I'll never forget this. He laid on the floor in the shape of a cross. And I thought about that verse from Paul, "I have been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me." And as I watched and they worked on him and I knew he had already passed, I burst into tears. It was so hard to lose my dad. He was my best friend, my biggest supporter. And then I lost my mom, presided at their funerals. Very hard. Grieving is a process, and it's very difficult. Jesus knew what it was to grieve. When Lazarus died, he saw Martha and Mary grieving and crying, and the shortest verse in the Bible is this: Jesus wept. He cried for Lazarus, and he cried in compassion for Martha and Mary. Jesus knows what you're going through if you're grieving. He knows what it is to grieve. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is a psychologist who specified, and she really majors in this whole grieving process. She wrote a book called On Death and Dying, and she wrote another book on grief and grieving. And she talks about grieving and that we all go through stages when we grieve because it's hard. We lose a loved one and we don't know where they are. It's very difficult. And she talked about stages such as confusion and bewilderment and anger, bargaining, and depression, and hopefully finally acceptance. And when it comes to grieving, what can happen is there's a kaleidoscope of feelings and emotions, and it's very difficult for the person going through it, and you can get stuck. You can get stuck in anger or get stuck in bewilderment or confusion or depression. What I like to say to people that are going through grieving, I tell them, grieve well. And what do I mean by that? Feel what you need to feel. Go through the stages. Go through the feelings. But then come to acceptance. Don't stay stuck. The person that's died and gone before you, they wouldn't want you staying stuck. They want you to go and live your life. I remember when my mother lost my dad, when my dad passed away, my mother was like jello. It was so hard for her because she was dependent on dad. But in time, she moved forward and became her own person. She became a very strong person. Dad had done so many things for her. She was dependent on him. But then she became her own woman. she grieved well. And that's my prayer for you, that you won't stay stuck, that you'll keep moving and you will grieve well. It's important that you have faith, and as you have faith, you can grieve well. Faith, of course, in Jesus. Don't stay stuck. Jesus told Mary, I am the resurrection and the life. By the word, that I am statement in the Greek, ego eimi. That's the statement that Moses heard at the bush. If you remember at the burning bush, when God identified himself, God said, I am. This is the highest claim to divinity in the whole of the New Testament. When Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life, he is saying that he's divine. But I am is also a present verb. He is saying that I am the resurrection and the life now. In theology, that's called a realized eschatology. That means that eschatology is the study of what will be happening in the end times. That means that the end times are brought right into the moment, that resurrection can happen now. And that's something that I've learned about in my faith, that as you believe, you will see the glory of God, not just when you die, even now. And that's really important, and I want you to get that realized eschatology. I love what he said about Lazarus. He said, unbind him and let him go. And I want to say that to you right now, that you will be unbound from fear and staying stuck in grieving and negativity and addictions, that you will be unbound. That's a realized eschatology. There's resurrection power for right now, and you will come out in Jesus' name. Come out of being worried all the time and stress and doubts and negativity. Come out in Jesus' name. Jesus will raise us up on the last day. He is Lord. But there's resurrection power for now. That's realized eschatology. I am the resurrection, he told Martha. I am the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. This new life that Jesus comes to bring. And I'm praying that as you watch this program, it will stir up faith in you to receive the grace that comes, the resurrection power of Jesus. The bottom line is that Lent is all about a journey of change. And in order to change, we need grace. We need power. We need help from above. Oftentimes what happens is, first Sunday of Lent, everybody's gung-ho, just received their ashes, they're ready to change, they're invested. Second Sunday of Lent, people are still at it. Third Sunday of Lent, not so much. Fourth Sunday of Lent, some people even stop going to church. By the fifth Sunday of Lent, people have kind of given up. Nothing seems to be happening. What I like to tell people is sometimes the best things will happen at the end of Lent. You have to understand that God's grace and timing is according to his will. We have to receive, we have to believe, and we have to let God be God. And I'm believing that this fifth Sunday of Lent can be momentous for you and life-changing in a time of grace. You can change. You don't have to stay stuck. It's a time, Lent is, of new beginnings. One of the ways that you experience resurrection is through the resurrection sacrament in the Catholic Church, if you're Catholic, the resurrection sacrament of confession. I remember one time I was at a youth conference, and there was probably 2,000 young people in there hearing a speaker, and I was one of 30 priests sitting in a room getting ready to hear their confessions. Then the door opened, and the young people ran to confession. I was wondering what that speaker had to say to them to so motivate them, but they ran to confession. And I heard one confession from a young man. He said he was just about to go to college, and he wanted to have a new beginning. He wanted to have his college days be right. And I thought to myself, yes, that's exactly what Lent is all about, new beginnings. And it's never too late to have a new beginning. Yes, it's the fifth Sunday of Lent, but it's not too late. Maybe you've messed up in some ways and you've eaten meat on Fridays, and I don't advocate that, but maybe you haven't gone to church, or you've sinned in some way, or you're stuck in an addiction. Now is the acceptable time. Today is the day of salvation. We heard that at the beginning of Lent, but it's good all through Lent and even past Lent, of course. Then I was preaching in Farmington, New Mexico one time. That's up in the Four Corners region. And it was right after the mass shooting that happened in Las Vegas. Some 61 people were shot and killed, and 867 people were injured at that mass shooting. I was in the confessional and a woman came in and she said, "Father Cedric, I don't normally go to Mass and I've fallen away from church, but I was at that concert. I was at that mass shooting. And it so traumatized me that I'm coming back." And she had a beautiful confession. It was a time of conversion, a time of new life. And I'm praying that for you. Jesus is the resurrection. He will help you to have new life. You don't have to stay stuck. It's the fifth Sunday of Lent, and we're talking about new life and about faith. Believe. Believe that Jesus is working in your life. Even if you don't feel it, trust, believe. God works through faith. Make that inner decision. And then what about the storms of life? We all go through challenges. We all have hardships. We all have difficulties. And sometimes that can shake our faith. What you have to do is believe right in the midst of it. I heard a story that I love to tell about this little eaglet. The egg was taken out of the eagle's nest and put in with the chicken's eggs in the chicken coop, and all the eggs hatched at the same time, and the little eaglet grew up with all the chicks. And as he looked around, he thought he was a chicken. After all he saw was chicks, so he ate like a chicken and walked like a chicken and talked like a chicken. He didn't know he was an eagle. And then one day, a storm blew into the barnyard and all the little chickens ran away. But the eagle had instinct take over. He stood his ground, and as the wind blew and the storm came and the tempest came, he stood his ground, and the wind began to make his wings extend, and he began to elevate. And as he elevated, at first he was afraid, but then he exercised his wings and he started going higher. The storm made him go higher. And soon he had a gracious realization that he wasn't a chicken at all. He was a gracious, soaring eagle. And what was it that made him rise? It was the storm. It was the tempest. It was the tribulations. In the same way, when we go through things, stand your ground in faith. Have unshakable faith. Don't be like the rest of the world that believes and then something hard happens and they don't trust anymore. Have unshakable faith, because it's the storm that can deepen your relationship with God. Even though I go through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, because you are with me. And as you're going through, as you're facing the storm, that's how you rise. You see, that's realized eschatology. That resurrection, new life, power isn't just for when we die, and it is, but it's also for right now. Jesus said, "I am," that great claim for divinity, "I am the resurrection and the life," in the present tense. It's the fifth Sunday of Lent. We journey with the OCIA people to Easter. We face the ultimate issues: death, grieving, adversities, problems. It's part and parcel of being human. But as Paul the Apostle says, we have the victory in Jesus Christ. Nothing, not even death, can separate us from the love of God that comes to us in Jesus. I invite you, grow in your faith. Faith comes by hearing. Grieve well. Don't stay stuck. Be transformed. Be changed in your moral life. Face your challenges, and the storm will take you higher. Believe, and you will see the glory of God. Don't just live, live with passion. It's the 5th week of Lent. There's still more time. God's grace is upon you. Wanted to share with you a letter that I got. She said, Father Cedric, I'm reading one of your books. You have a special gift of communication. Makes your writing and speaking easy to understand. It's so positive. It's exactly what I want to do. I want you reading. I want you being lifted up. I wrote a book called Rise. You don't have to stay stuck. You can rise. Remember, the resurrection's for the last day, but it's for right now. Jesus said, I am the resurrection. You can rise in your mind, your attitude, your emotions, your morals. Rise. Grace be upon you. Don't stay stuck. Keep moving forward. Please call 844-FATHER-C. You can order the book there and you can donate there. I see all the donations that come in. I'm so grateful. I pray for you. Also, go to my secure website, frcedric.org. Lots of inspiration there. I have a bookstore there and a place where you can donate. Thank you in advance. You can also write me, Houston, Texas. I see all the letters. I see all the donations. I see all the orders, and I pray for you. Thank you, thank you, thank you in advance. Don't just live, live with passion.
Billions of years ago, before the universe or Earth came into existence, God had you in mind. When the time was finally right, God created you and called you by name. In this powerful series, Father Cedric proclaims that God continues to call you to a personal relationship and inner transformation. Right now, simply call or go online and order the book Father talked about. Because of these programs, people everywhere are discovering God's call in a fresh new way. Every purchase supports Father Cedric in his God-given mission to touch lives and save souls. Father Cedric is a Catholic priest with a professed vow of poverty. Be assured that the money from your purchases will be used to produce and air Live with Passion. To purchase these powerful resources, simply call 844-FATHER-C. That's 844-328-4372. Or write Father Cedric at 430 Bunker Hill Road, Houston, Texas 77024. Or log on fathercedric.org and order online. Thank you in advance for your generosity. Together we are touching lives and saving souls.